we're gonna go into strength training for karate, and we're gonna start right now. All right, when we're looking at strength training for karate, the first step that I like to do is say, okay, what kind of sport are we looking at? And immediately we can recognize we are looking at a combat sport. So once we see, okay, we're in a combat sport, what are those strength characteristics that are going to be consistent around karate? And immediately we can look at, all right, someone has to be explosive if they're in karate, right? They need to be explosive. They need to be mobile, but explosivity means we have to train impulse, okay? So they have to apply a massive amount of force in a short period of time. That's gonna be blast impulse. So I start to think through that. Okay, that's strength characteristic number one. Strength characteristic number two, they have to have some type of endurance. They're gonna be going through different flurries, different combinations. We need to be capable of handling sustained endurance, okay? So this is that next step. All right, sustained endurance is that next consistent thing that they have to train. Now, finally, after we think about sustained endurance is gonna uphold the athlete right here. Then we've got that super explosive athlete up top, okay? That's the blast impulse. They're gonna be able to move very rapidly. We've gotta train those two areas. And then typically after coming into the middle, I'll start to think about the individual athlete. Are they more explosive or are they more endurance based? And if they're more explosive based, then we're gonna work on their endurance even more. So we might add in some classical endurance work. If there's somebody who has a really good engine, but they still tend to be a little bit slower, I'm gonna double down on the fact that we're training impulse, okay, if we have somebody who's not as explosive. So those are the ways that I like to think through the actual lens of strength training for karate. So what that means then is the next aspect that we have to look at is what are those actual movement patterns that we need to see. And the first big factor we refer to as dynamic trunk control. So if we look at a fighter along the spectrum of all combat sports, we have to think about somebody who's very stable in their trunk. We have to think about somebody who's very stable in their abs, in their back, even through their hips. So that first big factor is we want to use exercises that will train trunk control. If we want to train that trunk control, we also need to find movements that will take care of that impulse aspect or that power output, that speed strength, right? So that's going to be where we look at, let's do power cleans. Okay, I'm thinking right now about Lyoto Machida. He was somebody who was in karate, right? But he also was a UFC champ. He would do power snatches or power cleans, and that would help him with his trunk control, his stability, his ability to move very rapidly inside the octagon. That's a very quick way to improve your speed. You know, it doesn't have to be super heavy, and then improve your overall dynamic trunk control. Now that second aspect, now we're looking at, okay, let's say we're focusing on somebody who is really endurance based, but they're not super twitchy. The second thing that we're gonna focus on then is gonna be that sustained impulse. So we might use things like this, a contrast method. So if I have somebody in karate and their endurance is phenomenal, but they're just not that twitchy, we might do something like front squats for a set of 4 unbroken. Again, 60 to 75%, doesn't have to be crazy heavy. We're trying to build the best karate athlete. We are not trying to build bodybuilders. So we've got to focus on that sport specificity to a point. So now we're gonna do this front squat for a set of 4. After we hit that set of 4, we're gonna rest about 30 seconds, and then we're gonna go into a plyometric series. So we can do single leg hops or jump lunges with a plate or hurdle hops, anything along those lines. And then we're gonna rest 2 minutes and go back to that front squat. So now we're using a contrast method to train that sustained impulse to help this individual get more explosive. Now that next thing that we're gonna look at, what else are we trying to improve? We're gonna try and improve mobility. We need to make sure that their hips are mobile. We need to make sure that their overhead position is very mobile. We need to make sure that they can handle some unilateral strength. That's where we're gonna get into single leg squats. So let's say we're doing a goblet single leg squat, or even just holding a dumbbell or a barbell on our back, single leg squats. Let's say we do 5 sets of 10 on each leg with minimal rest. It's gonna help train their strength in that unilateral position and a little bit of the flurry endurance that we need, a little bit of that scramble endurance, again, that sustained endurance. And then finally, after we look at some of those consistent themes around the actual strength training, around the actual resistance-based training, one of the things that we'll even do is take a step back and say, how much time in their overall training sessions, in their actual sport, in karate, how much time are they actually practicing in a flow movement pattern where they might be moving for 15 to 20 minutes? That's where we want to see that endurance, that engine start to build up. And if they're only doing about 15 to 20 minutes, I would say once or twice a week, we might do some LSD work. We might get on a bike for 60 minutes. We might get on an assault bike or a rower. We might go out for a run for 60 minutes or get in the sauna for 30 to 35 minutes at 170 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so we're doing some things to try and build up that mitochondrial volume, which in turn should lead to an improvement in the VO2 max when we're doing those more intense aspects. So looking at karate from the lens of that combat sport is going to be how we program specifically for karate, how we program specifically for combat athletes. That's exactly what we do inside of our app Peak Strength. When we build out a program for a combat athlete, we think through all of these specific strength characteristics. We try to figure out what the individual athlete needs based off of the benchmarks. Then we program inside of the app based off of those specific aspects. And then the user goes in, they select that they want to train for karate, they want to become a better athlete, they want to be more explosive, and all of a sudden they can set that peak date for when their big tournament is, and we're going to set them up for that monster peak. That's exactly what we do inside of Peak Strength. You guys can head over to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store. You can download Peak Strength today to become an absolute freak. But we need to think through and just constantly be aware. This is about building a better athlete for karate. We need to train properly. We need to be as explosive as possible. We need to train in that unilateral position. We need to focus on the abs and the core, the trunk. If we can make that as dynamic as possible, that's how we're going to develop a champion. Because remember, freaks, if we want to become a champion, we've always got to cultivate your power. Peace.